And I just think it's really fun to be able to disarm the audience with a laugh, and then all of a sudden something bad happens, and you're back into the sort of tension and the thriller again. So yeah, I mean that's just my experience of life. You know, life is filled with horror and comedy.
I wanted to start off by asking you, in the real world, I believe we often overlook the tangible threat that our everyday devices, such as cell phones, could pose to our safety in general. But what exactly drew you to explore this possibility in a story like this film?
I was just very intrigued by the notion of this thing that we all have, that we carry with us daily, and that we look at over and over and over and over again throughout the day, how that could be sort of turned against us and weaponized, and used as an instrument of torment and control. And so I just felt like it was a really high concept, and something that you could really build an exciting movie around.
Right. What was the biggest challenge that came about when creating tension using such a mundane or everyday device as a phone?
I think the big challenge was making sure that we weren't actually just shooting phones,
Mm.
which I think gets boring fast. And the biggest challenge too is having to figure out a way to create a character that we never see. We have this villain, but we don't know who it is, and we never see them. And so I had to devise a way to help the audience feel a sense of their presence in the room and their personality. And we had to do that with messages, with text on screen. And so a lot of it was just the challenge of figuring out like how that should look and calibrating that, and making sure that it felt like it was just the right amount and not too much, and that you could really get a sense of who this person was.
Right, very well said. Well, you've mentioned this before, I know, but this film is set almost entirely in a restaurant that was built from scratch. And
Hmm.
that concept itself feels really Hitchcock to me. I don't know if he was an inspiration behind this,
Oh,
but could
very
you
much so.
well, yeah. Could you elaborate on this decision though, and how you achieved that really stylized presentation you give to this set in the film?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the entry point to being so stylized was, we're telling the story very much from Violet's point of view, and so I needed to get inside of her head, and that's what allowed for me to really push myself stylistically and to do all of these different kinds of lighting cues, and all of these sort of like off-kilter angles because there's like two modes in the movie. There's Violet on a date where she's having to perform for him and act like she's okay and everything's fine. And in that case, we shot things in a very steady way, in a very kind of like calm, like steady cam, dollies, like things like that. And then whenever she's dealing with her tormentor, that's when we start to kind of move the camera in really strange ways and use all these different lighting cues because I needed the audience to feel her anxiety and what she was going through with this other person.
Right. Well, finally, kind of as like my wrap-up question, I wanted to ask you, one recurring theme in your films is that really unique marriage between horror and comedy, which many might perceive as incompatible genres or complete opposites. But can you talk about why it's crucial for you to approach situations that sound scary on paper but make sense of them through humor?
I mean, it's what's different about this movie than previous films is that, this is not a horror comedy. This is, I think, a very classic kind of thriller, but it doesn't mean that you can't have elements of comedy in there because that's just what life is. That's realistic. And when you go to a restaurant, like we've all had that waiter before, you know what I mean? And so I found that it's a very effective tool to help release some tension,
Yeah.
so that you're not just staying on one note the entire time. It kind of gives you different layers and different textures. Um, and I just think it's really fun to be able to disarm the audience with a laugh, and then all of a sudden something bad happens, and you're back into the sort of tension and the thriller again. So yeah, I mean that's just my experience of life. Life is filled with horror and comedy.